somebody's got extra browser open. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next executive roundtable on security and privacy best practices from hyper-growth tech startups. Boy, that's a mouthful. My name is Graziano. I'm the data warrior, and I will be moderating this session of lots of interesting conversation I'm sure we'll have. You've met a couple of the folks here already, but I'm going to go ahead and have them introduce themselves quickly one more time. Why don't we start off with you, Jonathan?
Sure. Jonathan Sanders, Security Field CTO, Snowflake.
All right. Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben, Chief Scientist for Satori.
Hey, Colin.
Colin Anderson, CISO for Ceridian.
All right. And Chaim.
You're on mute.
Now you're unmuted. Now you're muted again.
No. Unmuted.
And echoing.
All right, no longer echoing. Hi, Mazal, SVP of Technology and CISO at Kandji.
Now I have to unmute. All right. Well, so we're going to start you guys off with exactly the same question that the last panel started off. What keeps you up at night regarding data security and privacy in your organization?
Where do you want to start? Want me to lead in? I'll go. So honestly, it's the unknowns. We have such a dynamic environments. They're changing so rapidly, and it's really the unknowns that keep me up most at night. When you know where your data is, you know the controls around it, you have at least, a relative understanding of what you're doing, what you're not doing. But data flows like water. It takes the path of least resistance. And so there are unknowns out there, and that's probably what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Lack of visibility, right? Like, as the business progresses at rapid rates and high growth, obviously you have different stakeholders that have different requirements, and making sure that you have a process in place, lightweight or heavy in some cases, to make sure that you have that constant visibility of who needs what, who's accessing what, and how you're approaching the situation.
So obviously I have a slightly different perspective since I'm on the vendor side. I also gave up a pager decades ago, so I don't actually have responsibility for the production environment. Thank you. But the thing that makes me lose sleep is talking to customers who are not actually taking advantage of all the security features that we give them. Not as altruistic as it sounds, because I know that someday one of them is going to get popped, and it's not their name that's going to be alone in that headline, right? And so, constantly keeping up with my customers to make sure that they're using what we've built in to keep them safe, and also using partners like Satori to make sure that's even stronger. That's that's what worries me, right? Is making sure everybody's taking advantage of the table stakes that we gave them.
And I will go last then. For me, it's an unfair question because I'm totally jet lagged, so I'm up at night anyway. But I think the thing that keeps me up at night is people. People are always looking for shortcuts, and despite the best intentions, and I'm speaking generally, I mean, in Satori, like Jonathan, I'm not on the pager duty, at least for that. But generally speaking, people will always find a way. If security becomes too complex for them, they will find a way to do what they want and get things to their laptop instead of accessing them through the cloud or whatever. So I would say that people is what keeps me up at night.
Okay, great. Now, in Anita's talk, she said that data SecOps is a critical piece of a holistic data governance program. So from the perspective of, a hyper-growth startup, that begs the question is like, well, one, what is DataSecOps to you guys really, and why is it important now? So we'll start with, how about Colin? You want to start with this one?
Sure. I'll lean in. The biggest challenge, with all high growth companies is you are trying to change the tires as you're moving down the road. The reality is these processes are changing, they're evolving. You're bringing in new employees. You're trying to mature your processes, and so honestly, two things that I really value is we over communicate, we assume the best, and we really try to actually go out of our ways to make sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. So there is partnership, there's shared ownership, but clarity of responsibility is also very important. So while I might be responsible for cybersecurity enterprise-wide, at the end of the day, there are people on my DevOps team, my DevSecOps teams have certain responsibilities, and I hold them accountable. And so being able to measure and monitor how they're doing and delivering is always very important.
Great. Ben, I mean, you are, Satori is a hyper-growth tech startup. So what's your perspective on that?
So I think that, first of all, I think that a lot have changed. I was also in startups before, and I think that now startups have less of a grace period, of allowing yourself to go totally wild because, we're still a startup. I think that in Satori, but not only in Satori, I think that in many technology startups today, you're starting from day one. I mean, we started SOC 2, like right when we started Satori, probably started working on SOC 2 and working on compliance as well as on security, monitoring and everything. You just don't have that luxury. I wouldn't say it's a luxury of of just going wild. So I think that that security, also in larger companies, but in hyper growth startups, security needs to be bolted into the entire process, and I think that it's the right thing to make it hard for startups to make it to ensure that you're secure from the get-go, that you have the right processes around the data security from early on.
Right. Okay. Jonathan, you see a lot of companies. You work with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, as well as tech startups. Why is now the time that DataSecOps has become so important?
Well, it's interesting, right? This whole DevOps or star ops, right? They started putting ops on the end of everything. I remember when I first heard it, I didn't know what it meant. And when I Googled it and read all about it, I realized I'd been doing it with Perl and Subversion like for decades, long before it existed, right? And I think the core of it, right, is just automation, orchestration, which is the gold standard for security because that means you're being preventative. And I definitely don't think it's just for hypergrowth, right? Because to your point, when I deal with, for the sin of living in New Jersey, I deal with all the big banks, right? And they're doing it too in the areas of technology where they are moving into cloud, moving into these more agile places, right? The star ops comes along with that when it's done well. And you also, for Snowflake's part, I may not mind the shop, but we talk to customers about how we mind the shop all the time. And if we didn't automate, we'd just drown, right? Like DevSecOps is just not even an option for us. The orchestration, the automation that we've applied to make sure we can scale out the controls so that we can satisfy, and you could talk about compliance, but I think the more important thing is satisfy the mandate we take by being good stewards of our customers' data. It would literally be impossible without the automation. It would just literally be impossible. So to me, like what it is automation at the end of the day, and it's driven by the mandate you have to protect information.
Yeah, exactly. So, Chaim, your turn.
Yeah. So for me, DevOps, DevSecOps, data SecOps. It's all about stakeholder enablement, right? And a lot of that happens through automation, but it's creating that defined path, right, for people to be successful and having everything baked in real time. You still have to be accountable as a stakeholder. It still has to be part of the culture, right? But a lot of those variables have been decided for you up front and give you a smooth way to be able to facilitate execution. And I think why we see it happen at high growth, right, is because it's the only way to keep things assembled, right? And so a lot of the Fortune 500 companies and large organizations also want to have that unique capability of being able to have a smooth conveyor belt to success. But I think at the earlier high growth, stage startups, it becomes unmanageable very, very quickly. So for me, it's being able to provide the best results and output for the organization while causing the least amount of variance and headache for everyone who's being tasked to provide those results. So I think it's more necessary now than ever from the data perspective, with all of the different, data regimes as far as, controls that have to be implemented for GDPR, or whether that's region specific in, Australia or Brazil or US based, and being able to effectively have a clear line of sight to what data resides where, how the internal stakeholder is consuming that data, and effectively what they need to be successful within their role without increasing exposure or risk to that organization.
So I'm gonna break the seal on crosstalk and just say that, like,
Go for it.
That's the why, right? Like, because I'm talking about the what, right? But like that's the why, and the what doesn't really mean anything unless you know why you're doing that thing, right? And then obviously you want to enable the user to get real insight from real information, and you're not going to do that without the orchestration of everything, including the security, right? So 100%. Sorry, Kent. Don't know if I'm supposed to crosstalk, but
hey, that's fine. It's much more interesting, I think, if we keep it interactive rather than me just rattling off a bunch of questions and you guys taking turns. So feel free to cut each other off if you want to. Jump into the middle of something. Tell somebody they're wrong. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right. So Jonathan mentioned agility. So this is I think a challenge for everyone. Is like, the question now is, how do you manage to balance achieving agility while you're trying to enforce the governance and compliance and security and all these things we've been talking about? So I want you guys to, share a little bit of your experience in trying to accomplish this, and any recommendations you might have of what works, what doesn't work, particular tools, Snowflake, Satori, processes. And organizationally, how do you make all this stuff work, right? Especially if you're in a startup mode as well. So let's go, Chaim. I'll let you go first this time.
Okay, cool. So I think it depends on the business life cycle, right? Where that business is and the time where you're actually attempting to tackle some of these initiatives as far as creating, agility. I've been in organizations where, no one had access, and there was a certain request to a certain small engineering team, and they were, required to go ahead and, give that data and give the feedback, right? Obviously, that's not a business enabler. That's not scalable. That can't last long term. I've been in other organizations where everything was, completely, unfettered to some degree, and there was logging, and we had, some sense of visibility, but there wasn't any real baked-in control or restriction. And obviously, that goes the exact opposite direction of not being able to have granular controls to, safeguard the business as a whole. And so, what that happy medium, I believe, for me is being able to really have those three prongs, which I look at like internal reporting, right, which is a huge use case for most companies as far as their data sets, right? In-app streaming and app activity, working for SaaS companies, like that's extremely valuable to our customers, how we go ahead and take this data, leverage it within our product. And then ultimately the third one is, data science and how we go ahead and improve the models that we're using for some of our activity and or our unique reporting use cases. So really thinking about how we can take those individual prongs and be able to apply controls to them that allow the businesses to be successful in what their requirements are, right? And obviously these are going to be very disparate and very different across different business segments. And if you don't have the ability to bake in controls that fit those parts of the business, right, having a unified blanket policy doesn't go very far as scalability and enablement either. So I've been a long-time Snowflake customer. I hate to brag, but the last, I don't know, I think it's probably like 6 or 7 years now. So very happy about all of that. And again, I've been a long-time Satori customer. And one of the things, I believe I told Ben with one of our first conversations, like, I don't know how I ever lived without this. And the without this means, how could I have an overlay, right, across the data fabric that I was using to be able to create clear granular controls and visibility and allow there to be onboarding real-time access where my consumers could say, like, hey, I have this use case, I have this project, these are my requirements, right? If this is in the realm of normality, right, can I get that access required, right, without having to go through a heavy change management process? Can I do my job? And the answer with Satori is like, yes, you can do your job. So that's been instrumental for me in multiple organizations to take some of the complexity that we built out within the power of Snowflake, right? Snowflake gives you all this power to go ahead and create different data streams and segments in the way that's going to be beneficial for your business. And with Satori, I had the ability to overlay controls saying, hey, it doesn't matter if you're in the EU, it doesn't matter if you're in the US, it doesn't matter if there potentially might be PII, it doesn't matter if it's just metadata. I can create controls that allow you to do your job in real time and set up our business for long-term success. And again, so finding the right tools, finding that right balance is key. And a lot of that happens through a lot of, I will say the data discovery also in Satori is phenomenal, saved a lot of manual work from being done internally by the teams. And even, when we go ahead and do manual audits, what we do is, because part of our requirements, making sure we have a second set of eyes, like it feels very, very good knowing that the things you put in place are working in real time. So
I want to say that to move a business forward, there's a lot of high-level talk that corresponds to what you say, Jonathan, that you've made some poor life choices, that these terms like need to share, like you need to move the business to a need to share state of mind, like that you need to share information. And I must say that I was in a need to share state of mind back before I was in Satori, and I had great data that belonged to my group. Well, it didn't belong to my group, it belonged to the company. And I like to consider myself as someone who really thinks about the whole business and not just my team. But when there were opportunities to share this data with other teams, I was totally scared. I was freaked out of doing that because, eventually it's my data. If it's leaked because we shared it with a different group, it's so complicated to do it to do it in the right way, to share data within the organization. Whoops, power went off. To do it in the right way and to do it without, sure, I can stop doing my work, like my team's work, and say, okay, let's instead build a way to, to anonymize this for that group and anonymize that for that group. But so despite best intentions, I became a disabler. And I think that what we as an industry need to get to is to allow, I don't think that people don't want to share data within their organizations, but allow them to do it in a simple way and in a simple and a secure way. That's my thoughts about it.
Just to bring the startup bit back, what's interesting to me is that Snowflake, 5,000 some odd customers, and probably the majority of them are smaller, more agile organizations, not the behemoth banks I spend my time with most of the time. But I do get the pleasure of talking to some of these smaller companies. And what's fascinating to me is hearing the themes that we're talking about here in those conversations, because that wasn't happening, some odd number of years ago, right? I've been on the vendor side for a long while, and I've been talking to companies of that size the whole time, and there's been a huge shift. I think Ben, said earlier, right? They had to think about SOC 2 the day they got the company founded, which is, kind of mind blowing to me, thinking about, the small companies I've dealt with in many different dimensions in the past. And so, I think that the thing that we see that's been a major shift for these startups is having to pick platforms right from the beginning that gave them the capability, even if they weren't going to turn on all of those dials right away, right? They had to have the capabilities on tap for the minute they brought in that first customer who was going to say, oh, well, can you guarantee me this and do that and have these controls? And are you going to be able to be on the ISO pipeline to be in that by the time I go live? And they needed to have that right away, and that just wasn't the case. And in the recent past, not a COVID ago, but reasonably recent past, you didn't see startups worrying about that, and now they do, right?
Right. Yeah. Because I remember even when I joined Snowflake in 2015, I think had already gotten to SOC 2 Type 1, and we're finishing out the SOC 2 Type 2, and that was critical to all the companies we were talking to. And back then, it was mostly small tech startups. So it definitely major shit. I had never even heard of that prior to coming to work for Snowflake. All these security controls, I just knew RBAC was basically all I knew at the time. So, Colin, what's your perspective on this one, on the whole agility and governance, and how do we, how have you managed it?
So, remember when we were managing projects and we were talking about cost, time, and scope? You always had to balance these three different things in driving projects forward. I think today it's you're balancing security and compliance with business agility and performance, and it's not easy. I don't have a silver bullet. A lot of what was just shared, I completely agree with. But what I found and what I would recommend is, you need to really truly understand what your customer needs are, because they might ask you for everything under the sun, but some of those are nice to have, some of those are must-haves. So really truly understand what's critical for your customer, and then don't over-engineer it. I think engineers as a whole, we love solving complex problems, and we do them usually with complex solutions. Keep it simple, people. Keep it simple. Tools like Satori allow you to do the discovery, the access control, a lot of things that you need to do in your data environment. And so you're not having to overcomplicate your environment with multiple tools. So as you're engineering these things and trying to balance these different drivers that you need to do for your business and your customers, look for technology that can help you keep it simple for you, that can solve multiple needs with one implementation. Because I've seen too often that, as engineers, we try to make things perfect, and perfection is definitely the enemy of good. And many times, you can actually get to that end state a lot faster if you really do focus on what's the must-have versus the nice-to-have, and keep it simple.
So it's funny. Like I said, I talk to customers all the time, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to talk people off the ledge a little bit, because they want to build these perfect edifices that are literally impossible, and it has nothing to do with technology. It's usually people and process problems, but you have to bring them back a little bit and be no, let's reset the goals here a little bit. Let's understand what you're actually required to achieve, and what will make you and your organization safe, and your customers safe. Usually that gets it down to the simplicity, right? If you focus on the right goals, right? But yeah, no, I hear that big time.
Yeah. Now I'm going to change gears just a little bit. Another one of the comments Anita made in her keynote was that data sharing is top of mind, and somebody's actually asked a question in the chat about data sharing with Snowflake and Satori. And certainly we've seen that with Snowflake, with the data cloud, and the massive rapid adoption of the data sharing technology that Snowflake provides via the data marketplace and private exchanges and all of that. But even before that, my background in data warehousing back 20 plus years, being able to augment analytics with we used to just call it external data sets has been like a desire and a goal in the data space for literally for decades. Well, we're there now. It's way easier to do, but I think Ben kind of referred to this a little bit too about the need for sharing data in his prior roles. Is that impacts how we have to think about that data? As are we sharing the data externally ourselves from our organization out? Are we bringing data in from external organization? What are the characteristics of that data? And what's the compliance and security requirements around that? So with the growth of data sharing, whether it's Snowflake or not, how does that impact our approach to security and privacy in all these companies?
I'm going to jump in just because we're going to. The other guys are going to talk about this in a real world way. I'm just going to give the Snowflake answer. By one opportunity, I think, in this whole thing to give a Snowflake centric answer. Right. So for Snowflake data sharing, right, as you well know, Kent, as you just made the point, it's built in, right? It's literally part of what makes it the data cloud, right? And we've built data sharing secure right from the start, right? And I can give lots of proof points for that, but that's not why we're here today. But I think the key question, right, and it's the question that these other folks probably have a lot better perspective on right now than I do, is that sharing proper, right? Because it can be secure, right? But is it proper? Meaning, has it been properly vetted? Has it got the right policies in place from the organization's point of view? Is there a data sharing agreement in place? And does that dictate certain parts of the policy? Maybe you're supposed to turn on some sort of masking. Did you do that? Right? Like there's all sorts of questions about the propriety of the sharing. Just because it's easy and secure doesn't mean it's proper, right? And that's, again, that goes right back to the first question you asked, what keeps me up at night? The people are using data sharing securely, but improperly, right? And that opens up a bigger, broader question, right?
I think that in part...
Go ahead, Ben. That was a great point that Jonathan just made.
Yeah. So I think that in part, because things are very fast. I mean, I try to think from my past positions. When we wanted to share data, you had all the time to think about all of these things, right? Because you had to Python your way through it and create a very manual process of how you're going to share this data and what exactly do you want to move. And now that platforms allows sharing data at a click of a button or integrated into some sort of a data ops process, like a data ops CI/CD process, it makes it very simple and fast. And then the problem of, it's so fast that you don't have the time to even think about it. And I think that's where it makes sense to have like a strategy as an organization, like a directive, a policy coming from the security part, that's you guys, from the security part, so that it will be a no-brainer. Like, okay, you want to share data? That's fine. But when you do it, it needs to go through this process of like a Slack approval by the data owner and masking of the following, like PII, PHI, whatever. But there needs to be like such a directive policy, which is very, very much like DevSecOps. Because also in DevSecOps, when we moved to DevSecOps, before that, and I think we were all in there, you had a lot of time. Like you had a banking application, so you had like a few weeks of code freeze where it went through security testing. And when everything went faster, like a CI/CD, you need to change your ways as well, and you need to make sure there's a policy that can be automated and as much as possible.
Yeah. Colin.
Yeah, no, as a security professional, we're so focused on making sure the data is secure as it's being shared. whether it be masking and other controls to protect the PII, but we're so focused on the way we're sharing it and securing that process that we don't stop and look at the broader data governance aspects. Is this data, should it be shared? And oftentimes the security team doesn't have that context. It's the data owner. And so as Ben talked about, you need a process where that data owner that understands the context is in the flow of approving, should this data be shared? The security team is going to make sure we're doing it in a secure manner, but we often don't have the context. Is there a legitimate need? Is there a legitimate use case for us to share data from customer A to customer B or from department A to department B? And so I think that's the bigger challenge that customers face, is understanding the context and should the data be shared, not how it's going to be shared, because that's usually the easier problem to solve. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Chaim, you're last on this one.
Yep. I have a couple different perspectives. One is the internal sharing between stakeholders, which I think, again, is a use case that we all have, right? Just to follow up on what Ben said, like having internal policies where you actually have the data owner be able to essentially give approval to a user with Satori is something that's extremely helpful, because you can look at the data set, you can look at the significance or the impact, and then you can go ahead and give approval based on whether or not that data set might be deemed sensitive or might have some other criteria that might be of concern. And then you can have conversations internally. It helps build that gap with communication. I still think it is difficult. I definitely agree with Colin that the security team does miss context a lot because they're not involved and integrated in a lot of those conversations, set the policy, set up the framework, and make sure that everything is running to full capacity. But having a tool that allows you to do that and allows conversations to be bridged between the stakeholders and the data owners, I think is super beneficial. And then I want to pivot a little bit on the other use cases from my perspective. One, so Kandji is Apple device management and security platform, and we have a ton of interesting data sets, right? A lot of it is metadata, a lot of it is useful from the security perspective and from the IT perspective. And so within Kandji, one of the things that we feel is very important, that most consumers right now are managing their data sets right through a data fabric like Snowflake. So giving our end users the capability to be able to go ahead and export that pertinent data for them, and to be able to overlay whatever they feel necessary to be able to manage and use that telemetry for insights for their organization is something that's paramount to us. And then the third use case, which I think is very interesting as far as the marketplace, right? We have lots of useful data as far as the endpoint and what's going on in environments and organizations. And there is a big benefit and value to be able to leverage a lot of that data with a lot of other very cool, unique tools that already exist in our industry that people want to go ahead and be able to plug in real time through that Snowflake marketplace. And so for those two last use cases, I think, again, there has to be a lot of collaboration up front. There's a lot of work that goes into that. What is good? What isn't so good? How do we all come to agreement? But I think the power that organizations have now to take a lot of those internal data sets that they have and extend them to their customers and be able to allow their customers to leverage them in ways that they're going to have ongoing success is something that we haven't had before in the past. And it's something that's really modernizing and speeding up everyone's pathway to success. So again, with tools like Snowflake and Satori, we wouldn't be able to do those things. So
yeah, so true. So in our survey, we had this number which scared the crap out of me. 61% saying that they're still having manual processes. So how does automation really fit in here, and the AI-assisted automation for this? Because at some level, manual processes, we all know, that does not scale. So how important is it for organizations in a startup hypergrowth mode to be looking at some form of automation, maybe AI-driven, around classification, tagging, something like that? Let me see, who we're going to start with this time. Let's start with Colin this time.
Sure. It's the challenge that, I think a lot of people face is you're not starting with a greenfield situation. And so you're inheriting certain tech debt potentially and other issues that you're trying to then drive automation. And typically I see a lot of companies, the first thing they do is they throw bodies at it. They throw bodies at the problem. It's the quickest fix is just, we'll get more people, we'll do more of the manual stuff. And they don't take the time to figure out if there's a more efficient way to do it. Can technology help solve the problem rather than more people solve the problem? And I think that's the biggest, trap people fall into is that they choose the easier wrong, and maybe the easier thing is throwing bodies at the problem and not taking the time, look at the process, can it be automated, architecting, greater efficiencies, because you have to sometimes slow down to go faster. And a lot of people don't want to slow down to go faster. And so they perpetuate the problem. But I think technology, Satori is a great example of something where you take a lot of manual processes and you drive a lot of automation to dramatically improve the efficiency, security, speed. But a lot of companies just don't take that deep breath, pause, and say, okay, we have a problem here. Can we solve this with technology rather than just perpetuating the problem of manual processes that you throw bodies at?
Yeah, to a certain extent, they're focusing short term rather than long term, and not looking at the long term ROI and even the total cost of ownership long term of the short term solution of throwing bodies at it. Are we really solving the problem in a cost effective manner, even from that regard, let alone time to value? Chaim, what have you seen in your organizations along this line?
Yeah, I think a big portion is if the business was aware, right, how much exponentiation there would be from having the automation of data in place, they would be more than willing to slow down, to go fast. Unfortunately, I think it's difficult to be able to communicate that, and it's difficult to also be able to say, hey, time out, pause. We're making decisions that effectively aren't coming from the rich data sets that we have, right, to be able to go ahead and inform us, right, when to turn right and when to turn left. So I totally agree with Colin. It is definitely something that as a whole, the industry needs to address, right? As far as being able to communicate effectively and saying, hey, if we could get these right data sets in front of the right people, it would inform the business to go ahead and be more successful. So one of the things that I've seen, again, is, and this might not be the best one, but is really pressing on that non-scalability, right? And so what that means is you're being asked to go ahead and deliver, this unique data, whether it's things that are going to help drive go to market, or things that are going to go ahead and drive product, or whatever those use cases are, right? And being able to say like, hey, right, if you give us this certain timeline over here to be able to actually build in the process and the people aspect, we'll go ahead and turn around those results, but we'll make it self-service for you. I think everyone likes the idea of self-service, right? Everyone likes the idea is like, I don't have to go through a gate. I don't have to talk with the stakeholder. I can get what I need and we need it. Sometimes those things work. Sometimes they don't work. Again, it's always a careful balance. But I think the biggest thing is, again, using the technology like Colin referred to and getting the right things in place to be able to accelerate people's capabilities to be able to have what they need. And I think sometimes those investments aren't made, unfortunately, until it becomes so egregious and painful across the board that everyone decides unilaterally that it has to happen, right? So sometimes we do the right thing when we know it's the right thing, and it takes some time to get there.
Yeah. Jonathan.
I just want... Oh.
I was going to ask Jonathan, what have you been seeing? I said Jonathan. Yep.
All right, fine. I mean, I'll just say quickly, I was really scared when I heard that number 2. 61% sounds high, but when I thought about it a little bit, I also kind of realized that these things are patchy, right? I mean, I remember working in my last, well, actually, I guess it's 2 careers ago, with a company who automated this self-service request portal for, in this case, it was doing identity governance, right? So, can I be a member of this group? Can I have an account in this system? And looked awesome, and the business loved it. What they didn't know was that off in the other building, there was a little room full of people who, when those requests came through, they went to the system, logged in, and created the account or did the group association. And so, that's a company with a manual process, but if you ask the executives, oh, we're automated. We just, we go click and it's great, right? So it's kind of interesting. Organizations sometimes are forced to make choices, right? So that might be why that number is so high. And I'm not saying it's a good idea. That's why you want a platform that can solve all those problems for you. But, that might be why the number's so high.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's kind of what I wanted to hear from you. So we're right at time, Ben. So you get to bring it home here with your last comment on this.
Okay, so what I wanted to say that I spoke with a data engineer a couple of months ago that was probably one of the 61%, and he gave me the anecdote of the frog that when you put it in boiling water it jumps out, but then when you put it inside and warm the water, then you have a great frog soup. Unfortunately for the frog, not eating frogs, Chaim, but don't judge me. Anyways, the metaphor is, and I've been doing this scene also, though I'm a fanatic for automation, but still, in some cases, throughout my career, you're doing something and you're using some sort of capability, and then you're saying, takes me only 1 minute, right? And then, your team expands and you're getting 10 times the request and you're still doing it that way because, we know how to do it. It's just, for us, it's nonsense. We're technical people, right? We're hardcore. We can edit the JSON file. What's a JSON for us, right? And then after a while, you quit your job because you're so unsatisfied about not doing cool stuff because you're editing JSON files, or for the metaphor. So that's I think that's part of the reason why this happens. People have a mechanism that works. So you want to build something new, but you don't want to, it works, but yeah.
Well, we're at time. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. I still have a list of questions that we didn't have time to get to. There was questions in the chat. There's all sorts of things for the folks watching. Thank you so much for your interactivity in the chat. And again, guys, thanks for your insights on all of this. Hope our viewers got something out of it, which I'm sure they did. So see everybody later, and enjoy the next session.
Thanks.
Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.